All right, welcome to. I think I start every podcast with "all right."
Yeah,
That's my first
That's
word
your
out of my
thing.
mouth. I need a better intro catchphrase than "all right."
you're stealing McConaughey's catchphrase.
Yeah, I just don't do it as repeated.
You don't repeat
as,
yourself
yeah.
like he does. Yeah,
We're off to a great start.
We are.
Already.
We are.
But it was in my head. It was like, hey, Jeremy, don't start with "all right" this week. And then the first word out of my mouth was
all right.
All right.
And then we're talking about the fact
Yeah.
that you're saying all right.
So, maybe I could have gotten away with it, but then I
brought
decided
attention
to draw
to it,
attention
yeah.
to it. So today, I think, is a special episode
It's a special episode.
because full disclosure, busy day yesterday. I didn't have a chance to come up with like a unique, like, hey, here's a gimmick
Right.
topic. And Andy said, hey, let's just talk about our favorite movies, and we're going with his favorite movie first this week. We're going to do sort of a home and home. Next week we'll talk about my favorite movie, but this week's Andy's favorite movie. And I think he's mentioned it before on the podcast, but just for the sake of this episode, Andy, would you like to reveal what movie we're going to be talking about today?
Jaws. We're going to be talking about Jaws, and I'm so excited.
I'm glad that for a movie that is as old as it is now, I think Jaws is a pretty universally seen and recognized movie that
I think so.
I think most of our listeners can go, oh, great, yeah, Jaws. I know Jaws. I'd love to hear people talk about Jaws.
I hope so.
So that said, Jaws came out in what year, Andy?
1975. June 20th, 1975.
I knew you would know that right off the
I
top
did
of your
know
head.
that.
So it's probably the oldest movie that's gotten a mention so far on our podcast.
It probably is.
But obviously we didn't catch it in its initial release
We did
in
not.
theaters
No.
because of how
I was -5 when it came out.
I was not far behind that. So what was your first experience seeing the movie Jaws?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I want to apologize that I don't have a Jaws shirt on and you do. I'm embarrassed. See, Jeremy, now you're bragging. When you get to be 40, sometimes you pack on a few extra pounds. And I've owned many Jaws shirts in my day. Many Jaws shirts. I can't say that any of them fit right now. And as you know, sometimes we like to give a behind the scenes. We were both at Old Navy earlier today after we had lunch, and I was looking for a Jaws shirt, and they didn't have one. So I am embarrassed. How's our wardrobe budget?
It's about like the rest of our department's
Oh, okay.
budgets.
It's a little low right now.
We're still waiting for those sponsors to come pouring in.
Well, once they do, I'll have I'll have many Jaws shirts.
Yeah, if any of you business owners are listening,
we're
we're open to pitches right now.
Yeah. We'll advertise.
We'll
I'll wear
sell
your
product.
T-shirts. You name
Exactly.
it. No, yeah. So to answer your question, Jaws is absolutely my favorite movie of all time, and I knew we would eventually talk about this on here. So since we started doing this podcast together, I've been thinking of this in my mind when I discovered it, what age I discovered it. And like we talked before when we were talking about our old favorite things or favorite things when we were kids, sometimes your memories kind of they kind of mix together, or you're not sure if it just became a memory because you convinced yourself. But I do think I have a pretty accurate remembrance of discovering Jaws. The only thing I don't remember exactly is my exact age. I want to guess I was about 8. I've talked about this on here before. My mom is just a real cool person, and she never worried too much about showing me things that would scare me at too young of an age. She was just like, yeah, just go for it. So I do know the first time I saw Jaws, this was back in the old days in the town I grew up in. At the grocery store, you could also rent movies, VHS cassettes. Jaws has that amazing poster that just shows you everything you want to know about the movie. Just the woman swimming in the ocean and a giant shark below her in the water swimming up. And I think that caught my eye, and my mom let me rent the movie. Of course, I'm 8. I don't know anything about Spielberg, or I don't know anything. Just thought the VHS cover looked cool. My biggest memory is taking it home, watching it all the way through, being completely engaged in it. And as soon as it was over, I immediately rewound it, because that's what you had to do back in those days, and just watched it all over again. It just so grabbed my attention. And it wasn't, of course, because of my age, it wasn't about the skill of the film it wasn't anything. It was just the pure enjoyment that is that movie. And it's such a simple movie, but it's got so many layers of greatness to it. But just the concept is just literally a shark, comes to this island and starts eating people. I mean, and not to oversimplify, but that is literally what the movie is about. And it just captured my imagination. And, it wasn't like at 8 years old I was like, this is my favorite movie. But looking backwards, that is totally what happened. It just caught my imagination. I always say it's the movie that made me realize I loved movies. And I just never stopped loving it. I'm sure shortly after that we probably bought the VHS of it. And it's just a movie. I mean, I have literally probably seen it. I wouldn't be shocked if I'd seen it 150 times all the way through. Plus many other times in the theater. Fortunately, it's come out in the theater over the years. Culminating in last fall, it came out in the IMAX, and I got to go see it in the IMAX. So that's kind of just a very brief history of it. And as I grew up and as I got more into movies, like as a teenager, and like I've said before, I also grew up in the era where there was a bookstore in every mall. So I would go to bookstores, I would find the movie section, and then I would start to read books about movies. So then I learned about the making of Jaws, which is its own amazing story, and how everything went wrong, and the shark wouldn't work, so then they had to change the movie, how much they showed the shark, and that just made me even more interested in it. And so it just kept building. And then as an adult, when I did feel like I had, of course, I knew then, I loved movies, and I could learn more about the craft of making movies and what all went into movies and camera work and all these things. Just made it everything. As I learned more about movies, it just made me love that movie more and more and more. And it's my favorite movie. I just think it's such an unbelievable achievement. I think it's amazing that it is as good as it is. I think it will always be my favorite movie. I'd be very surprised if anything ever overtook it as the top spot.
Yeah, I think if it's held it this long, it's very hard to imagine something else coming in and taking its place.
I think it will always be my favorite movie.
Yeah. My first experience was, like you, I'm having a hard time putting a number on the age.
Yeah.
But I remember I didn't watch it in its entirety, my first experience. But my first experience of it was being at a friend's house, and I think the adults were watching it. And we kind of were watching around the corner, watching the screen. Probably caught the last 30 minutes. I think by the real ending, they just kind of invited us in, just come in and finish the movie with us. And so I watched the ending, and it was terrifying.
Oh, it is.
But captivating and really left an impression on me. Also, I don't know at what age as kids we really learned about sharks. I know what the animal was, but that was probably my first
introduction to sharks.
It's okay, this is what sharks are. This is horrifying.
Yes.
Kind of like the jokes of, when you're a kid, you imagine quicksand's going to be a much bigger problem than it is. Cause it's
I thought sharks were going to be a much bigger problem.
I just thought, sharks are just, you don't go.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was my first experience. And then of course later it's years and years of, I don't know how old I was when I watched it just start to finish for the first time, because it was one of those TNT movies that's just,
you're always catching it in different parts.
It's kind of this is in the movie. I didn't even remember this part, and I'm piecing it together. And then the first time I watched all the way through, it's it really is a masterpiece. And I knew all the parts were good, and then you put them all together, and it's wow.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into, obviously we've talked generically what a great experience and visceral experience it is. So let's kind of break it down, get into the nitty gritty of what actually is it that makes Jaws such a great movie. Because before we started joking about, essentially, as you said, essentially it's a movie about shark eats people off an island. There's actually a lot of animal attacks people movies. Not a great batting average, not a great percentage.
No.
So for Jaws to be one of the greatest movies of all time, coming out of this genre that's generally not good and campy.
Right.
How does Jaws stand out?
Yeah, and I've thought about that a lot, and I was telling you before we started on my notes here. I just wrote, if you want to understand how good Jaws is, just watch any other movie that's like Jaws, and they're just not good. I guess I shouldn't even say they're not good. There's some decent ones. There's some ones where you go like, what's the Blake Lively movie, The Shallows?
The Shallows.
Like that's a good movie. Like it's enjoyable, but it doesn't. It left no impression on me. It wasn't, I wasn't like, this movie's a part of my life now. So yeah, I think about this a lot. And I think that you got a lot of things going on. And I don't even know, this is not in any kind of order. I think the biggest thing is you got Spielberg. So Jaws is directed by Steven Spielberg. And you and I were talking before I wrote this down in my notes. It was his third movie. That's insane. And, I think one of the biggest kind of like the narratives around Jaws is, especially looking backwards all these years later, you hear a lot about how everything went wrong in Jaws. The shark wouldn't work, and the shoot like tripled the amount. It was like triple the amount of time longer than it was supposed to be. But as much as everything went wrong, so many things went right for Jaws, intentionally or unintentionally. When they grabbed Steven Spielberg to direct this movie. And I don't know if it was just incredible foresight on the producers who grabbed him. But luckily, it just turns out it's like you just so happen to grab, arguably the greatest filmmaker ever to make this movie. And they couldn't have known that at the time because he'd only done 2 movies. And I think maybe like some TV. But that is the biggest thing, is just the Spielberg touch, where not only is he, he can shoot, and we would find out, because of Raiders of the Lost Ark and all these things he would do afterwards, Jurassic Park, he just is the best at making thrilling, exciting movies. So you've got that. And then Spielberg, he just goes above and beyond what he needed to do for this movie. He does such a good job of just the characters and the character touches. And he cared enough to put scenes in like, there's the scene where the Brody, one of the 3 main characters, and his son are at the table together, and the son is mimicking, he'll go like this, so the son will go like this. And it's just kind of this really sweet, kind of relatable moment. Like, even if you don't have kids, you've probably seen kids and their parents do that, where the kid is copying the parent. So he threw stuff like that in that just takes it just to the next level. Or probably most famously, like the USS Indianapolis speech, where he's just such a good, smart filmmaker that he knew that that's what that movie needed. He knew exactly how, that scene, that speech where the Robert Shaw character talks about his experience on the USS Indianapolis. In lesser hands, that could just derail the movie, or you could just be kind of sitting there and going, "Come on, let's just get to the shark again." And I've seen this movie a million times, and I'm so into that speech every time he gives it. So I think the Spielberg thing is just, you can't ignore it, to what takes this movie from just what could be, just a so-so movie to that next level.
Yeah, there's Spielberg's so good directing this movie that I think even cinema nerds watch it and go like, that's really great shots.
Yeah.
Like shots that you just, of course there's the iconic zoom in on Brody, where the
Brody,
background's is in contrast to where it's moving.
Kind of zooming in and zooming out.
Yeah,
at the same
that's
time.
an iconic shot
that
people hadn't seen before. There's the framing up of the boat leaving the shore, and you're framed up by the shark jaw, like the skeleton of it. The shot of Quint on the bow of the boat. It's just sort of rocking. There's just so many shots. You're like, it's you could freeze frame this and make a picture out of it and post it anywhere, and it's just beautiful. And I know I've said that about some other movies, but most of the other movies I say that about are modern movies where the technology and the effects are so good and colorful and cool. And this is literally just shoot a camera at an angle and make it look great.
Raw talent.
Yeah.
So that's a big, the Spielberg factor is huge. I think, I've always been of the opinion, one of the things that separates Jaws from so many other movies in this genre or like this is that they were out in the real ocean. Anymore it's soundstage or a tank in a studio, and then CGI plays such a big part. This movie came out in 1975, long before anyone knew what CGI was, and I think that it just blows my mind to this day. And I tell my kids all the time, because I make them watch this movie a lot, and they've gone with me several times to the theater to see it. I'm like, I always tell them, you guys have to remember, they literally just put a mechanical shark in the real ocean. It's insane. It's unbelievable.
Which, when you hear it, you're like, no wonder they had so many problems with it. You're putting a machine with all these working electronics into water.
In the ocean, in the salt water ocean. And that just, still to this day, blows my mind that they did that. In 1974, I guess, probably when they were making this movie. But it just makes it... Because they're in the actual ocean, it just makes it, I don't know, it adds so much. It never feels fake because it's not fake. Yeah. I mean, they are actually in the ocean. And then, you would find this out later in Spielberg's career, but it's like we've talked about, on some different pods about different movies. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark is a good example. Jurassic Park's a good example, like I said earlier. Spielberg just... Every aspect of his filmmaking is top notch. If he's going to do an animatronic, like if he's going to do a mechanical shark, it's going to be done to the best of the ability at that time, which it is. Having seen this movie so many times and seen it on the crystal clear IMAX screen, I don't ever think the shark looks fake, personally. There's never a part where I'm like, well, it was 1975. Like, I think it holds up unbelievably well. It's edited to so well, and they know exactly how much of the shark to show you. They know exactly when to cut away so that it doesn't linger on the shark too long and you can see that it looks fake. The music, of course, is everything is just top notch, A+, best in the biz. So
yeah, and I guess that was good a time as any, because we've alluded to it, is Spielberg's great and also lucky, and the great pivot he made, because the intention was to show more of the shark. Yes. And one of the greatest things about the movie is that it just teases the shark for so long. It leaves so much to the imagination. You don't see the shark, which was not intentional. It was just out of necessity.
The shark literally wouldn't work.
And as I say, necessity is the mother, or what is it? Necessity is
the mother of invention.
And there's great invention. And I think, and Spielberg has said, like, it's the greatest thing that happened because it forced us to be creative. And, obviously, again, it's what makes Spielberg great, is that in the hands of a lesser director, that problem it ruins the movie. Yeah. We don't have the shark. We were planning to do this. What do we do?
The movie just collapses.
But Spielberg is able to go, okay, well, don't worry, guys. I got this. Like, we don't need to show the shark in a shark movie.
No problem. Small obstacle to overcome. We don't have a shark for our shark movie. Yeah. And like you said, it turned out to be the best thing that possibly could have happened, because I don't think it would be as good of a movie. I've seen interviews with him where I think you can even look online and find where he sketched out kind of storyboards for the opening scene. I mean, the shark was literally supposed to leap up and get the girl. Like, leap, not up in the air, but right out of the water. And so right out of the gate, you're seeing the shark. They do such a good job because of necessity of, it's not just that you don't see the shark. I think they did a couple really smart things. Number one, if you watch that movie and you really pay attention to it, the girl who dies at the beginning sells that death scene so well. I mean, she seems so scared and so horrified, and it's not like you don't know that getting eaten by a shark would be awful, but she proves it. Like, that's awful.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's a horrifying scene.
Well, and we know from the making of that, again, happy little accident. They genuinely hurt her. They broke something, like her leg broke or something, and she was in genuine pain, screaming out because the contraption they had was hurting her. And it just, it worked out that she had genuine, terrifying, painful screams. Yeah, and
it worked out amazing.
Yeah,
and then so you got her, and then the next victim is the little kid, which is just horrifying in and of itself, and you don't think of someone getting eaten by a shark and good acting, and both of those people are just, they only exist in the movie to get eaten. But for what they have to do they do it phenomenally because they just sell the awfulness of being eaten. Like that little kid, he's underwater and he's flailing his arms and he makes this horrible, terrible scream. And so they do that. And so without even seeing the shark, you're terrified of it. You're seeing and then they have things like, they have that great scene I've always thought was so smart where Roy Scheider's character, Brody, he's the police chief of the town. He doesn't like the water. He's such a great character. But he's flipping through a book about sharks. And it's showing shark victims. And like these really graphic, like this dude's got like a huge chunk of his arm gone. So it's putting these... they do so many things where they're just telling you sharks are awful. This shark is so dangerous. They're just putting that into your mind. And you haven't even seen the shark. And then they have that brilliant scene where the two guys are trying to catch the shark for the reward. And the dock, it pulls the guy out. Again, you're not seeing the shark. And the dock, the pier or whatever, is going out in the ocean. And then the guy's swimming back. And all of a sudden you see that pier just turn around. And it creaks really loudly. Because again, amazing sound and sound design. Because Spielberg is the best. And that dock turns and then starts coming towards the guy. It's really scary. And all this stuff is happening, and you've never even seen a shadow of this shark. So they do such a good job of making the shark present and showing you this is how destructive sharks are. And then the people who do get killed do an amazing job of kind of selling it.
Yeah, absolutely. That... I mentioned to you before we started, one of the things that I think makes Jaws great is that it's hard to categorize it in a genre.
Yeah.
It's like several genres blended together. And, I said the first half is almost more like just a horror movie, and the second half is like an adventure movie as they go out on the three guys on the boat. But that first scene with the girl, that is pure horror movie.
Oh, it's nightmare.
It's
night, it's dark, it's so scary.
It is, and as people have said, it's the movie that made people scared to go into the water.
Yeah.
And what else is a horror movie than something that inspires fear? And that's, like I said, as a kid, I thought that's just what sharks are. They're man-eating.
They're just waiting to kill me.
If you go out there and dangle your legs in the wrong
you will
place,
get eaten.
I think to this day, people still, if they're out in the ocean and the thought just kind of crosses their mind. What about sharks? And you're kind of creep your legs out of the water. I'm not tempting the fates.
No. It literally affected the movie Jaws affected human behavior.
It did.
You can read statistics about the summer it came out. Ocean beach attendance plummeted.
Yeah.
It literally made people afraid to go to the beach.
Well, and I know animal activists, animal rights people will say
it gave sharks a bad name.
The general public's perception of sharks is that they are just man-eating killers, which the actual numbers and statistics I know are pretty low.
Yeah.
And it's there's so many animals that are more dangerous, but sharks are just embedded in our brains now as they are the predator most likely to attack us as humans. So, but going back to the genre question, because again, I kind of love the pivot that the movie makes, because once it turns into a movie about the three main characters on a boat out there trying to catch the shark, you already mentioned the score of the movie, which is great. Of course, the most iconic is just the very basic rising tempo, dun-na-dun-na-dun-na. But there's also this great sort of adventure at sea score that comes up a lot once they're out at sea.
Yeah.
You got Quint singing his little sea shanties.
It's incredible.
The scene of the USS Indianapolis speech where they're comparing scars before that speech, and they're
so good.
It becomes almost like a buddy movie,
like a buddy movie,
of guys trying to hunt a shark, and it's it's like this. Most movies aren't smart enough to blend genres like that, and just describing it, you might hear that and think, well, man, it must be like viewer whiplash to go from terrifying sharks.
It's so seamless,
but it's seamless.
It is
perfect.
Yeah. And they, when they do pivot, like you said, because, like you said, at the beginning, it's almost kind of a horror movie, and it's the people on this island. And it's, you get to know the three. You can tell pretty quickly there's three main characters: Brody, and then Hooper, who's like the shark expert they bring in to like advise and stuff. And then you have Quint, who's kind of like the shadow hanging over the first half of the movie. Yeah. You only meet him really briefly, like in that town hall scene. And again, I guess this would be a Spielberg thing, but you got to give credit to the actors too, where they do such a good job. You know exactly who these characters are, and you understand them. Brody is the, no pun intended, but like the fish out of water. He's a New York guy, and he's on this island, and they do such a good job. And they don't, in so many movies, lesser movies, there would be some scene where some guy's like, and remember, Brody, since you hate the water, and it would just seem forced. But in this, you learn through dialogue still that Brody hates the water. But because it's Spielberg and Spielberg's direction and it's good acting, it never is like, oh my gosh, that was really lame. I guess what I'm trying to say is you learn about these characters and it just feels natural. It doesn't feel like in a lesser movie where they're like, it's very clearly a person explaining plot to the audience.
Right.
And in this, just because Spielberg is just a level better than almost everybody, it just feels so much more natural. And these guys so well, or you understand their characters so well, when they are out on the boat at the end for probably the last 45 minutes or to an hour of the movie, I would say. Maybe not quite an hour. But you understand exactly who these characters are, what their motivation is, and then you learn even more, like through the Indianapolis speech about Quint.
And that's what really I think is what makes the movie successful. And you've already alluded to this: the fact that the human characters are so well drawn, and so relatable. But it's also three very distinct characters who all are believable that they're in the situation.
Yes,
because Brody being basically a retired cop who's like, I've served my time in New York, and now I want a peaceful.
I want to just coast
on this island. And then, sorry, dude. As soon as you start, you got a real issue to solve. Hooper, who's the expert, but kind of comes from money. He's this like kind of high class guy, which is great fodder for him and Quint.
Oh
because
my gosh,
Quint is the ruffian. Like he's the part probably any actor would go like, if I could choose the part I want to play, I could chew the scenery playing Quint because he is such a character. He's so bizarre and odd.
Yes, I always say that. It's such a weird character, but in the best way possible.
Like uncomfortable, like you're kind of like, I get why Hooper doesn't like this guy. He's just giving him crap all the time.
Oh my gosh. And he's weird, like he just says these weird things.
Yeah.
Like just little sayings and phrases, and he sings weird songs. Yeah. And you're like, who is this guy?
Well, and obviously, you say like, who's the villain in the movie? It's the shark. That's who's killing people that you go after. But there's actually like sort of a weird case to be made for
Quint.
The shark is doing what sharks do.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, animal people would be like, that's not really what sharks do. But,
right.
It's not like the shark is malicious, like in the sequels talk about later. Doesn't have intention. But if you're like, who are the real villains of the story? Probably the mayor of the town. Who refuses to acknowledge what's happening. And then Quint, who at first just seems a little odd, but then by the time he's like, you can tell he's got a personal thing.
It's an obsession.
He's going to endanger the other guys' lives. I mean, he's really is. He's an Ahab character.
Yes.
It's a play on the Moby Dick. Like,
it absolutely is.
This is a guy who wants to catch his, great white whale.
But again, 100%. And then that is what makes the USS Indianapolis speech even more brilliant.
Yes.
Because even though he's crazy and like, I remember as a kid, I'm mad at him. Like, what is he doing? Like, there's that scene where he's driving the boat so aggressively, and the other guy's like, stop it, and he blows the engine or whatever he does, and basically strands them out there. But because they put in that Indianapolis speech, you almost, it kind of flips it where you're like, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
Like, this guy had the most traumatic experience possible that you could have with sharks, and this is like a personal vendetta for him.
Right.
It just brilliant. And that, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that is what elevates this movie. Mm-hmm. Where it's stuff like that where you go, man, the amount of thought they're putting into these characters and to their motivations and to who they are is, like, I proposed the question. I'll probably, I think it'd be a good time to put it in now. Like I told you, I said, in my opinion, no movie in the history of Hollywood has ever overachieved as much as Jaws. and it's for reasons like we're talking about. There's been literally probably hundreds of something attacks people in a place. Like that it's been done over and over again. And like I said before, like with The Shallows, some of them are good movies, but there's a lot of good movies. There's not a lot of great movies.
Yeah.
And Jaws takes the shark attacks people and becomes, a lot of people would say it's one of the greatest movies of all time.
Yeah.
It overachieves beyond what any movie ever has, in my opinion, and because of stuff like we're talking about.
Yeah, you said that. I was like, man, that's a great question. It's probably something I'll continue to think about.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think is most amazing about it, again, from the time being that it's as old as it is, as we talked about, the lack of effect, there's no CGI or anything like that. But there's also there is nothing cheesy about the movie.
No.
Like, there's nothing, like you said, it's not even just the shark not looking real. There's no, like, weird character elements or plot points where you look back and go, like, man, it's just kind of cheesy. I mean, obviously, the other, like, sort of well-seen or popular shark movie, like Deep Blue Sea.
Oh, my gosh.
Which it's a movie that I actually enjoy, but I enjoy it for the cheesiness.
Yeah,
I watch it and you kind of laugh and you're kind of embarrassed.
You enjoy it because of how ridiculous it is.
Because how ridiculous it is. And I'm like, Jaws is not ridiculous or cheesy.
No.
It feels so authentic and real. It feels like this could be based on a true story.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody reacts the way that, even like the mayor, everyone kind of rolls their eyes and goes like, oh, the mayor, like, what a ridiculous character because he refuses to
But it's really not.
If you are the mayor of a town that depends on tourism and you shut down the beaches during tourism season, you're now the mayor who the town maybe went under your watch. Like, you
I think they handle that character so well. Because like you said, that could really be a parody almost, or just like so many times those movies like Jaws are in that genre, or, well, like we said, Jaws is hard to put in a genre, but so many movies like that think they have to throw in like I don't care what anybody says, we're not closing those, and that character becomes a cliche. Mm-hmm. But it does feel right in this, and they know exactly how much of the Mayor Vaughn character to have in the movie. Mm-hmm. They don't overdo him, but he's in it enough where you're like, and they do a good job of establishing like the town, the island of Amity, and it's so simple, but it's just so smart where you're just going, this is what this guy depends on. He is kind of, he's like kind of like the slime ball character, but you're like, I mean, I get it. He needs, he wants to look good. He wants to be the successful mayor, and it does make sense. Yeah. And then they know exactly when to take him out of the movie.
They do.
Once the three guys go, you're done with Amity. Now you're just the three guys out on the ocean. Right. And that they're so wise. They know exactly when to do that and not to overdo that character.
Yeah, and there's really not like a big I told you so moment for Brody to tell the mayor.
Nope.
Because first off, Brody's a good enough character that like that's not what he's interested in. You just get kind of a moment of when it becomes clear we have a shark and he's eating people, of the mayor just it's a great moment for that actor because he just gets to have a moment of like, yeah, this is bad. I was wrong.
Yeah, it's a scene of if they're in the hospital.
Very like he just gets to be solemn, and like you show some regret in his body language. Yeah, and that's what.
It's actually a really quiet scene. It's the two of them in a hospital after one of the shark attacks, and Brody's son is involved, and he just sign it, Larry. He's having him sign the thing to have Quint kill the shark. There's no yelling. There's no, and in a lesser movie, it would be like he would punch him, and there would be this big thing. And in this one, it's a really great scene, like you said. Both of them, their acting is great in it. And the mayor, you can tell he's kind of ashamed, and he's kind of holding his head low and kind of slumping his shoulders, his body language and everything. It's a really good scene.
Yeah. I think. First off, I love that it's people might not know this. The only ratings back then were like,
oh my gosh, I was hoping we would talk about
the fact that it's a PG movie. I was looking at some of the like Rotten Tomatoes stuff for this movie, and as you can imagine, pretty much universally praised. Yeah. There was like one score from one of the top critics that didn't certify it fresh, and one of his biggest complaints, or what I read, was just that like there's a shocking amount of violence for the rating of this movie, and Yes, there is.
Yes, there is. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the movie, I mean, we'll just be frank here. The movie opens with a nude woman being eaten alive by a shark, and as, I'm trying to be tactful here, as TVs and quality of TVs and enhancement of Blu-rays and stuff has advanced, it's very clear that she is without clothing. We'll just say that. You know, when I watched it when I was a kid, you couldn't see. You knew she was without clothes, but it was so dark, you couldn't see. And we'll just say that is no longer the case. And we'll just keep it at that. Yeah. And it is a really violent movie. I would argue that Quint, again, this whole thing is just a spoiler. We're not trying to be discreet about that.
I think we're past
it's almost 50 years old. So Quint's death may be just the most horrifying death in movie history. It definitely goes on for like 5 more seconds than it should. It seems like, to me. I think it's not as a complaint, but like you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Oh, he's still thrashing around. And again, going to what I was saying earlier, it was like every person who dies in that movie, it's like it's like there was an Oscar for best movie death, and they were all competing for it. I mean, they're really, really selling it and going for it. And if you want to see just a gruesome, horrifying death scene, if you're into that, watch Quint and Jaws. It is terrifying, and it is bloody, and they do cut. It's a lot of quick edits, but it's unbelievable. And the blood out of his mouth.
They needed one last thing to like.
Oh my gosh!
Squish him enough yet? Let's have him split up.
And well, never mind the fact that he just slowly slides to his death. You know, his worst nightmares are coming true. And because I've seen this movie a gazillion times, when the shark initially grabs him, this, again, amazing sound in this movie, it's like you can just hear his bones cracking as it bites his legs. It is horrifying. I would challenge anyone to name a more horrifying death scene in movies than Quint.
Yeah. Here's a question for you that maybe you know, maybe don't. I don't know if it's on record anywhere. Richard Dreyfuss's character goes down in the cage.
Yeah.
Gets, the shark attacks.
It goes terrible for him.
And then he goes and hides, and we don't know his fate until the end. He pops up again. Do you know if that was always the plan, or if he was supposed to be killed in the original story?
So the way I understand it is, so in the book, the Hooper character dies. So the way I understood it was supposed to be that way in the movie. He was supposed to get killed in the cage. But if you know anything about Jaws, one thing they did that was really smart is they actually there's this couple who did like underwater, I don't know exactly what they did, but anyway, they recruited this couple. They filmed real sharks in the ocean, and they spliced that footage into the movie, which was a genius move because it shows a real shark moving in ways that the mechanical shark couldn't pull off. So for what they did,
as we would see later in Jaws 3.
Oh my gosh. I feel like the other Jaws sequels just need their own podcast of you and I making fun of them. So long story short, if you watch Jaws in the movie, once Hooper gets out of the cage, there's a scene of the shark. He's kind of like stuck in the cage and in the wire, and he's like flipping around. Well, that's a real shark. That's real footage they got kind of by accident. And so that was such good footage, and Spielberg was like, man, I can't not use this footage of a real shark in a real cage thrashing around. So they rewrote the script, because obviously no one was in the cage in the real footage.
Right.
And so there was no way to make it work in the movie. So them getting that footage of the real shark, I think, saved Richard Dreyfuss's character, and they just adjusted on the fly and rewrote the script to let him live because they wanted so badly to use that actual footage.
Yeah, and I think
so. That's what I've always understood that he in the original script he was supposed to die, but because they got that good shark footage, they rewrote it.
And I was thinking that was the case.
Yeah.
And I think it worked out well. I think it's a better ending.
I did too.
For him having lived.
I did too. Quint, I think just the one of those three guys, just the one death is enough.
Yeah. And it kind of had to be Quint. Like it's the one that narratively just made sense. He was the guy who was, kind of drove them to these circumstances and was. And
Honestly, I think Quint's death scene is so good, and the actor Robert Shaw is so good in it. You're not going to beat that. So if Hooper's death was supposed to happen after that, you're just going to remember, even if it happened before it, the Quint death is what's going to kind of steal the show. So I think it's better that it's just him. Right. And it's a really nice moment at the end when Hooper does pop up and Brody kind of sees him coming and they just laugh.
Yeah. Because I was about to say that. Like, I don't think you could end as they did without Hooper because, well, let's just talk about this. The way that they eliminate the shark, I think, is great filmmaking.
Oh my gosh!
First off, as a kid, it was necessary to have that sort of reference to the tanks earlier, and them being explosive, because I didn't know what those were. And and then later you see the shark destroying the boat, gets the tank, slides in his mouth as he's trying to get Quint to slide to him. It all just builds perfectly, and then the sinking boat into the water.
It's incredible.
Couldn't be more dire circumstances because you got Brody
gosh.
who doesn't even like the water. I don't think can swim.
Yeah.
The shark's coming for him. He's got last second shots, and then the shark comes up and he sees the tank, and it's there's my salvation.
Unbelievable.
And perfect.
That's Spielberg to me.
It is.
Just such good, smart, thrilling filmmaking. You know, and it's kind of funny in the book. The book, I don't like the book. The book is is really depressing. There's a lot of extra there's like a mafia subplot. In the book, that's why the mayor won't close the beaches. He's being blackmailed by the mafia. There's an affair in the book between the Hooper character and the Brody's wife. There's just a lot.
Yeah.
And the book is written, it's depressing. Like, nobody's happy. Like, I wouldn't say Jaws is like a happy movie, but because it's got that Spielberg touch to it, it's such a thrilling adventure. And you do feel like as Brody and Hooper are paddling back to the shore, you know, you're happy for them. They've built a good friendship, and it's uplifting. So in the book, the shark, you know, some of the same things, like where they're shooting the barrels, and I think that's all in the book. And in the book, the shark is coming for Brody. The ship is sinking, and as it's about to get to him, it just dies. It just, like, it's been stabbed, it's been harpooned, all these things, and it finally just gives out. So it's like in the book, it's like, so Brody closed his eyes, preparing to be eaten, and then he opens his eyes, and the shark's just sinking down to the bottom of the ocean. And, you know, and Spielberg was like, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And he came up with this genius ending. And there's this amazing, you can read or maybe watch a clip on YouTube. It shows you why Spielberg's so brilliant. Because he was like, you know, in my mind, I knew the idea of this shark holding this tank in its mouth perfectly so where someone could shoot it and swimming at the main character. And he's like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not plausible at all. But, you know, he said his goal was like, I wanted to make such a good movie and such a scary movie that by the time you got to that, you don't care if it's ridiculous because you're so invested in this movie and in the Brody character, and they've done such a good job with the shark. You don't think of it as being ridiculous.
Right.
Like, how convenient that shark is just holding a scuba tank in its mouth. And
it's done as well as you can do it again, because there's when Hooper first brings the tanks on board and he mentions something about them being
such good,
like it doesn't feel like a real obvious wink like, hey, audience, tuck that away.
Yep.
And then
it's kind of just a throwaway line.
Yeah, then when
he literally pulls a rope and the tanks kind of spill. And he said, Martin, that's compressed air. If you screw around with these things, they're going to blow up. Yeah. And then they just move on.
Right.
It's not like
it felt like
dun dun dun, or, you know.
I feel like that's appropriate for that moment.
Yep.
And that's all.
And then it just moves on. But then when you see the tank again, you go, tank.
And the sharks, again, he crashes on the back of the boat, so everything's sliding towards the shark. And when it slides in, even then, like, you see it, you know it, but it's not like they were like, we got to make sure the audience sees it, so let's show
the camera
5 different
zooms
angles.
in.
No.
It's just real casual.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's... I know I keep repeating myself, but that's Spielberg, and that's taking, you know, a basic movie and basic material and elevating it to the next level. Yeah, and that ending is so. I was telling you when I came over here. I was like, I lost track of time because I was watching Jaws and I was watching that ending. I watched like probably the last 10 minutes of the movie. Unbelievable. Yeah, it's just unbelievable.
But yeah, we kind of went really long way.
I know. I'm so sorry. I'm just rambling.
It was all things we needed to talk about when we're talking about Jaws, but. I just don't think the ending hits the same if it's just Brody left and he comes up in the water. He's got no one to look around or talk to, and it's just okay, he's got to swim back to shore,
Yeah.
and then cut to credits.
Yeah.
But Hooper coming up, then like I said, doing that joyful laugh, like we made it, we did it together,
Yeah.
and then what do they talk about? How far away are we?
They say, what day is today?
Yeah,
It's Tuesday. No, it's Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then it almost kind of ends on a little joke. Brody says, I used to hate the water. And then Hooper says, I can't imagine why. And that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, and the fact that they're kind of paddling together, just there's a warmth to it.
There is.
That makes you go like, it's that, like you said, Spielberg magic. There's just a little extra magic thrown into
Yeah.
everything where, horrifying movie.
Oh my God.
Great adventure movie,
horrifying.
and it ends with just like
You're
magic
just happy.
and like, yeah.
And, the acting, I don't think you can overstate enough how good the acting is in this movie. Sometimes I think if you're like a movie nerd or, if you think about movies like the way you and I do, you think good acting has to be like Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood or Lincoln or, these like a lot of times you think of like these historical epics or I don't know. You don't sometimes think of good acting in a movie like Jaws, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I was going to wait. I wanted to work this in somehow. I'm going to work it in right now. I think from an acting perspective and from a character point, I think you could argue that Robert Shaw is at least top 5 greatest supporting character in a movie ever.
I think you're absolutely right. I was actually going to make that point that it's such a great character and a lot of respect to the other 2 leads.
They're unbelievable.
But the fact that they let him cook and said, like, I don't need to try to, like, shine with this guy.
No.
I can play more down-to-earth characters. Yeah. And when I'm in scenes with him, he's going to be the scene stealer.
Oh, my
And
gosh.
it's going to be okay. Like, kudos to those guys for staying level and letting him be
fly
the,
just on a completely different planet.
Yeah, because, I mean, Roy Schneider is the
Roy Scheider.
Roy Scheider is the guy who plays Brody. He could be going, hey, this is my movie. I'm the lead character.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's make sure I'm getting the shine. But he plays his everyman. And kind of fish out of water and lets Quint cook.
I just think the acting is unbelievable, and I think the Quint character and performance is just like I said, Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
To me, of all-time great supporting characters in a movie.
And honestly, like, even for me, who is a movie fan, like I've seen a movie or 2 that has that actor in it.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, for me, I just think, oh, he wasn't a fisherman. It's hard for me to even fathom
like that he was just a normal
he was an actor. He just is Quint. Like he embodies it. I can't believe that it's a guy playing a part.
His look. Just even the way he looks, like we said earlier, he sings really weird, like sea shanties, and he has these weird, like, phrases, and he's just...
Which if I think I've read before that weren't in the script, but, like, he spent some time with
people
fishermen
on the island.
And like, they did it, so he was like, I'm just going to do it.
He basically just stole it, stole some of the ideas from these characters, and it's just incredible. Yeah, it's an incredible performance.
I believe an actual drunk in real life.
Yes,
so
he died like 2 years after
much.
Jaws came out. I think he was like 51 when he died.
Yeah. But so I'm sure he drew on some real inspiration there for a guy who's got some demons in his closet.
Oh yeah, I don't think that was a big stretch for him.
Yeah.
And I care about the Oscars, but yet I don't care about the Oscars. It's insane to me that none of those 3 guys were even nominated for an Oscar, and it's insane to me that Robert Shaw didn't win an Oscar for supporting actor for playing Quint.
Yeah, well, it is a movie that obviously has benefited from time and people growing to appreciate exactly what it was and how big it was. It's credited, I think rightly so, for being what created the summer blockbuster, which is, I mean, the summer blockbuster is almost the thing that movies center around.
It seems like a no-brainer now. But at the time, so I've done a little, the summer was used to be kind of like the dumping ground for movies, and the winter was the big, like Christmas was the big movie release time before that.
Which I guess, if you're looking for rationale behind that, I guess people are going, well, it's summer. Who's going into a theater?
Everybody wants to be outside.
Everyone's outside. And winter, that's when it's cold. People go inside to watch movies. But now you're thinking summer, that's when people are free, vacationing.
It just seems like a no-brainer now.
And like everybody, not only did Jaws inspire all these types of movies that were trying to be animal attacks people in movies, but it just inspired like
The summer
a
blockbuster.
big spectacle that people will go see, and it ran in theaters for like forever, didn't it? Like the initial run, I mean, just went on forever.
You can do a lot of cool research about just the release of Jaws. You can find cool pictures online of just these theaters in 1975 and just people stretched back for what seems like miles waiting in line for it. A lot of cool stories. First movie to ever make $100 million at the box office. I mean, it changed movies, honestly. Like, if you are interested in kind of the history of movies and how they release movies, it changed things forever. Back in the day, movies used to be released. They would release them in like tiny, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say 20 theaters in the whole United States. And then they would slowly build and slowly expand if the movie was successful to more theaters. Jaws got put in I think at the time it was like 400 theaters or something like that at the time, which at the time was, is a big release. And that hadn't really been done, on that scale before. A bunch of just nerdy stuff I know about Jaws. I mean, it literally changed movies and launched, probably I would say arguably the greatest directing career of all time in Spielberg.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it launched his career, and he's never really he's been successful ever since.
You could go through the next at least you could go 4 decades straight where you could make a case that Spielberg has one of the top 5 movies of the decade every decade at least. I mean, Jaws in the 70s, the 80s you could make a case for probably 4 different Spielberg movies.
It's unbelievable.
The 90s you've got Jurassic Park and Saving Private Ryan
and Schindler's List.
There's more obviously, but I just mean like
if you're just hitting the main points, it's unbelievable.
He's still doing his thing. I watched just a few years ago he had the West Side Story remake come out, and that is a movie that nothing about it is am I the target demographic. I don't really care for musicals. I would not have watched it if it weren't for the fact that it's directed by Spielberg. Movie. And I heard somebody else word it this way, so I'm stealing somebody's take on the movie. They said Spielberg took what could have been just a very cut and dry, here's a remake of a thing that's already been made, but he put so many great little directing flourishes into it that I was loving watching the movie, even though musical sometimes that takes me out of it. But he would do such cool shots and camera work and stuff, and I'm going this dude is taking a remake and he's putting real passion and care and magic into it. He's
unbelievable. He's unbelievable. I always think sometimes in Hollywood, someone will direct a movie that's so well loved and revered, and they never come close to hitting those heights again. But I always think of it you direct a movie of a certain level, say Shawshank Redemption, Frank Darabont directed Shawshank Redemption. He's never really hit those heights since then, but everyone's always well, we give him a pass because he did Shawshank. Spielberg's done 7 movies that are like that, where it's Jaws, Close Encounters, Raiders, E.T., Private Ryan, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Minority. I mean, he's directed so many movies that are just have reached such a high level. It would be anybody else's highlight of their whole career, and he's done 9 of them. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do the work on this, but I bet if you went to a lot of 100 greatest movies lists, Spielberg would have 10 entries on
unbelievable.
It or something like
that. It's unbelievable.
It's very rare, I think, for a movie to be so universally accepted as beloved as Jaws is, and I think it's appropriate. I think it's good that it's universally beloved. I've never heard anyone just be like, Jaws, don't really care for it.
It's just not a good movie. Yeah. Well, and I've told this story on other pods. When it came to the IMAX last fall, my wife and I went, and then we went with some friends, and all my kids who are teenagers, they brought a bunch of friends. There was a bunch of us that went to see it, and it had appeal from the 15-year-olds to me. Of course, I already knew I loved it, but I wasn't worried oh my gosh, if you told someone I'm taking a bunch of my kids and their friends to see a 50-year-old or 46, 47-year-old movie, you'd be like, oh my gosh, they're just going to be on their phones the whole time. They're going to be so bored.
Yeah.
No, not. I wasn't worried about that at all. I didn't. I wasn't like this is going to become their favorite movie. I didn't think that, but I was not worried at all about them being bored or just kind of like rolling their eyes, like, "Oh my gosh, my dad's making me watch this ancient movie." I didn't think of it that way at all. I was excited for them to watch it.
Yeah, no, and kind of to my point, it wasn't but a couple years ago that I actually finally sat down and watched Citizen Kane. And it was like,
and it drags.
Okay, like I could see there's some good stuff in here, but like I never want to watch this again.
No,
it drags. Like it's just it doesn't connect now. I don't think at all. And
there's such a disconnect between so many old movies and now.
And somehow Jaws is just timeless.
It's timeless because I think too. It's so obviously it's. Everything's magnified. Like we were talking about, sharks don't behave that way. Mm-hmm. It's insane. If you really think about it, when that shark kills Quint, that shark just straight up leaps up onto that boat and is just chomping. It's like, oh, I know he's going to slide that. It's all ridiculous. But the idea of being afraid of the water, what's underneath me in this, like those are the timeless aspects of it. And just the simplicity of the story, I think. And it doesn't need like you watch a lot of old movies and you notice like the glaring lack of technology or something like that. You just don't notice that in this. It's just this beach community and there's something bad in the water and that's scary. And that will never. I think Jaws will be talked about forever.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll ever slip out of the movie consciousness.
Yeah. I think there's one other just lucky thing, and this is such like a weird, trivial thing to talk about, but the look, the wardrobe, and stuff of the characters, little dated, but nothing that's so of its time that you watch and go, oh my gosh, like, can you believe like the crazy hairdo or something? Because back in the day that was normal. It's just kind of like they just kind of look normal guys. I mean,
do.
You could imagine those guys being like that today. Like again, there's no crazy just of its time thing that would really take you out of it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, not to get too nerdy or to even oversimplify it, but like, Brody's just in like jeans and a t-shirt in the last, like when they're on the boat.
Yeah.
So it's just like, like you're saying, even their wardrobes, there's nothing about them where you're like, oh my gosh, did people used to dress like that? To me, the ultimate test, like to me, it's just like I said when I showed it to my kids or some of my kids' friends, I wasn't like, man, when we get to this one part, I'm going to hear them like snickering in the background or making fun of the movie. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen at all because there's nothing in there that you're like, oh gosh, that is so dated or that is so 1970s or anything like that. There's nothing like that at all.
Yeah.
And to your point, like you said, when you watch, because I did that when I was in high school, I did the same thing. Like I said, like, well, I'm a movie guy, and everyone says Citizen Kane's the greatest movie of all time. I'll watch it. It really felt like a chore to get through. Or even some movies now, they're, Casablanca or some of these. No disrespect to those movies, but it feels like more of a, okay, like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to watch this because I'm a movie guy, and I'm supposed to watch it. Yeah. And which I did, but it was work, And Jaws just doesn't have any of those qualities. None of that, like... I don't think you could ever be like, well, it was good for 1975.
Right.
It does, because you can say that about a lot of movies. Like, well, it was good for 1971, but now, it's still good, but it's not. I don't feel that way with any second of Jaws at all, where you have to kind of like, make excuses for it. Like, well, it was a long time ago. It was just a different time. I think it holds up unbelievably well. I think it holds up perfectly, actually, and I think it always will.
Yeah. We've reached almost the hour mark now. I think a few minutes short because we started the cameras a little bit before we started. So I'm just going to tell people, if you've watched up to this point, we really appreciate it. And if you cut it off now, I won't blame you. But I wanted to just briefly touch on the sequels.
Oh my gosh.
So again, I understand if you're like, I'm not nerdy enough to watch through you guys talking about the sequels.
Can I say one last thing about Jaws real quick?
Absolutely.
I also think among the many things that Jaws does so well, I also think it has the greatest jump scare in movie history.
when they're
The head in the boat.
looking at the boat.
I've seen that movie 600 times, and it's still scary. The 600th time.
Yeah.
When we saw that in the IMAX last fall, I did not. My kids had already seen it. Their friends had not. It was so, because they were sitting behind us, it was so hard for me not to just turn around and stare at them. And they screamed. And they, like, you could hear them come up and down in their seats. It is an unbelievable jump scare. I think it's the GOAT jump scare in movie history.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that in.
You're probably
somewhere.
right.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't do my homework on that. There might be others, but it's so good. And I just wanted to throw that in there somewhere too.
Yeah. Well, let me just, before we get into the sequels, has Spielberg done another horror movie? I don't think I can think of any. Like, he's done a lot of genres.
No.
But I don't think he's done
I
anything
don't
else.
think he's ever done anything else like this.
Like scary, like
No.
that. I mean,
he's produced like Poltergeist. There's a lot of
Yeah.
rumors that he basically directed it.
obviously,
That would probably be the closest, wouldn't it?
obviously, well, yeah, that'd be the closest. And Jurassic Park has the most.
It has a lot
similarities
of-
to Jaws.
yeah.
The slow build up with the T-Rex, and he can build tension really well. But it's still not quite
No.
a scary movie like
No.
Jaws.
That's
is.
interesting because he did it so. I mean, Jaws is one of the scariest movies ever made, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's top 5 scariest movies of all time. That's a really interesting point. I'm surprised he never wanted to return to that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, he's pretty open about what a nightmare the
Yeah.
Jaws shoot was. Maybe he just wanted to stay as far away from anything that
Yeah.
reminded him of Jaws. But it's too bad.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to see him go back to it because even though Jaws maybe isn't what we think of as like a traditional horror movie, the suspense, the terror,
Yeah.
he's so good at that stuff. Watch the opening scene if you want a good example of the girl. I mean, like we
Yeah.
talked about, it's the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah, and we've talked about before too. Like sometimes the best stuff comes from somebody working outside of their usual level of interest, and maybe that's the deal. Maybe Spielberg, early in his career, doesn't have as many choices as he wants. I'm sure he wanted to do Jaws, but like maybe it wouldn't have been the project that he particularly chose.
Yeah.
But here's a guy with certain interests taking on a horror movie, and that combination maybe is
Yeah.
what made it so magic.
And maybe I really do wish, like you talked about this last week when you were talking about how you like the Spike Lee movie Inside Man.
Yeah.
And like you made the point, like it's not really a Spike Lee movie. Yeah. And maybe it's an interesting point. I do wish more directors would get out of their comfort zone, like Scorsese did it with Shutter Island.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of like Scorsese's version of a horror movie.
Yeah.
To an extent. I mean, it may be more of like a psychological thriller, but definitely him. It's not a gangster movie. It's not, a lot of what he's used to.
Right.
And it's, it's not my favorite movie, but it's a fascinating movie. It's a good movie. So that's a good point. Maybe it would be nice if, I guess like directors are like, they get comfortable in certain things. And even though Spielberg does a lot of different stuff, he has never dipped his toes back in the water of kind of the horror and the thriller, or maybe he just thought, well, I can't do better than Jaws.
Yeah, which would be fair.
Which may be true, yeah.
Which can lead us into our sequel discussion,
Yeah.
because obviously Spielberg did not return for Jaws 2. Most people didn't return. Roy
What-
Scheider did kind of.
He was
not kind of
contractually obligated.
Reluctantly,
He did, yeah. And I think he was pretty open about it.
Yeah, and he was fine in the movie. Like, he's not bad in the movie, but which is always impressive because when you really don't want to do a movie, you could really mail it in. And he
was a great actor, I think.
Yeah.
He had a really good run there in the late 70s.
But I still maintain Jaws 2 is not a good movie.
It's not bad.
I believe there was a really good movie in there.
I will say if it wasn't for Jaws 1, we would probably think Jaws 2 is pretty good.
That's true. I rewatched Jaws 2 just like a month ago.
Yeah.
Had been a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm watching, I'm like, the concept I think was great. And it actually, like, the guy who came in and directed, I can't remember his name. I think he was a foreign
He's like a
director.
French guy.
And I kind of agree with him. He's like, we can't do the thing where we don't show the shark
So
again because
we're
it's
gonna do
already
the
done. Like,
opposite.
we've already seen it, so let's show the shark from the beginning.
Yep, and he does.
They really lean into sort of a more traditional thriller setup where it's like, hey, here's a bunch of teens.
It's a smart premise.
And I love the idea that these teens are all going out boating and the shark attacks and they end up all kind of stranded on this collection of collapsed
Like
boats,
broken.
and
It's kind of a cool idea.
And it's a cool idea. Rewatching it though, I was like, man, they really didn't lean into that enough. They're not on it as much as I.
It's like the last
remember.
20 minutes of the
like,
movie.
Not that I want it to be like so many deaths, but only one character dies in that scenario, and it's poor Marge of all people.
Yeah.
Most people don't remember her name. She's like the most commendable of all these irresponsible
She dies
teenagers.
saving the little kid.
And the shark comes up and swallows her whole, basically, and it's
a cool shot too. It's like behind the shark, and it's cool. Yeah, Jaws 2 is okay.
Yeah.
My problem is I just wish it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Because I love the idea. I bet we'll talk about this one day in a pod. I love the idea of like, stop. Just you have this gem. Just leave it alone.
Yeah.
And to me, sequels, I can separate crappy sequels from the original.
Yeah.
Basically, I just block them out of my mind. But it does kind of tarnish or I've even talked to people, and like, Jaws is my favorite movie. And they're like, oh, is that the one where they're at SeaWorld? I'm like, no. And like, you get so defensive.
I feel like saying, Rocky's my favorite movie.
Rocky,
when he fights Tommy
Gunn? No. Yeah. So I just pretend like they don't exist.
Yeah.
If I had to say, though, like, Jaws 2 is okay.
Yeah.
But you watch it, it just doesn't have the heart that Jaws 1 has at all.
No.
Or the fearlessness. Like, maybe you're onto something. Like, Jaws 1 kills a kid, a dog, and Jaws 2 has no guts with who it'll...
I know. I was sitting there going, like, I think there might have been more fatalities in Jaws 1 than Jaws 2.
Probably. And usually the sequel ramps up the deaths.
And Jaws 2 was by far the best attempt in the sequels because they just keep going downhill from there.
Okay.
And I've got to confess, Jaws 2 is the only one I've watched from beginning to end. I've seen just chunks of Jaws 3 and Jaws Revenge. I've seen enough to know. I've seen the endings. I've seen, like they're bad.
Jaws. Okay, can I give you a little?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have seen them all. When I was, like we talked about, when you're younger, you have no taste. Mm-hmm. So I had all 4 Jaws movies on VHS and would watch them pretty frequently. I do think I knew, even as a kid, like, obviously they weren't in the same league. Jaws 4 is probably the worst movie ever made. And that's not hyperbole or exaggeration. It is unbelievable. So the shark is personally attacking members of the Brody family, or Martin Brody. So I'll try to explain this really quickly. At the beginning, it attacks one of the Brody children. Roy Scheider is not involved in the movie at all. The wife is in the movie. She's terrible. It attacks and kills one of the Brody children. It's such a poorly shot and edited scene. You can't tell what's going on. Literally, you cannot tell what's happening. It's like these 1-second cuts of like teeth of a shark and then like some thrashing around. It's terrible. So Mrs. Brody goes to, I think, Jamaica maybe with her other son. The shark follows her because it's a personal revenge. The shark roars like a lion, like it leaps out of the ocean and literally roars. There are scenes, and you can see it plain as day, I'm not making this up, where you can see like the rig that the mechanical shark is on. Like you can see the actual like device they're using to have this shark in the ocean. You can see there's a part at the end where they're supposed to be out on the ocean. They did shoot this one in a soundstage, and you can see the wall of this, like the sound stage behind them. You can tell they're filming in a tank, and like the clouds behind them are just clouds painted on the wall. It is to say it's a terrible movie doesn't even do it justice. It is. I would say it's laughably bad. To me, it makes me angry how bad it is because I just feel like it really hasn't tarnished the legacy of Jaws, but it just like guilty by association.
Right.
It's so. I really, truly do believe, without hyperbole, it's the worst movie ever made.
What a way to finish the franchise of where the first installment's arguably one of the greatest movies of all time, and the last
one of the worst movies of all time.
Jaws 3 kind of alluded to it earlier. I just will always think of the scene at the end
where it crashes into the glass,
but it shows the shark coming, and it is so clearly not real because there's no movement, there's no tail. It is just
it's hilarious,
straight floating towards,
and it hits the glass, and it's this terrible 3D effect where the glass, like If you want to get a good laugh, just YouTube it. It is atrocious.
Better 3D effects in Back to the Future of the
Oh
shark
my
coming down than
gosh,
in that movie.
it's so bad. And you're right, it's so funny. The shark is just lifelessly floating towards this glass. It's awful. It's really unfortunate that they made those movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it because I don't get the let's just keep bleeding something, for returns. But yeah, it's too bad because Jaws, was this phenomenon that made a gazillion dollars. So they just immediately tried to leech off of that, and definitely, the quality undisputably is, 1, and then 50,000 miles below that is 2, 3. I mean, they just kept getting worse and worse to the point where 4 is just laughably
Is an unintentional comedy.
a complete unintentional comedy. It's so bad.
Yeah. Well, this has been
Oh my gosh,
a really
this-
fun discussion.
I fear that if I go back and listen to this, it'll just be me excitedly rambling. When I love something as much as I love Jaws, I have all these thoughts in my head, and they don't always come out of my mouth very well because I'm just so excited, and all these thoughts are scrambled together in my brain.
That's how I felt after our Oppenheimer podcast. I listened back to it and I said, I've got to not be so excited because I jumble my words, I mix things up, I say the wrong thing.
Me too.
So
My brain and my mouth can't keep up with all my thoughts, and
Yeah.
I have just such a high regard for Jaws. I think it's flawless. I know we hit this and we talked about how much we love it, but sometimes you love a movie, but you still wish there was like a scene that wasn't in it or something. I honestly wouldn't change anything about Jaws. I don't think, personally, my opinion, I don't think it has a flaw. Do you? Do you think there's a weak spot in it, or? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
if you could probably nitpick just a couple things, like probably could have gotten a better actress to play Brody's wife.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Nothing that really distracts.
Distracts,
Like you're saying, there's not a scene.
I think
Bill Simmons in The Rewatchable talks about, is there a bathroom break moment?
No,
And
to
it's
me
like,
there's not.
Yeah, there's not a point in the movie where I'm like, okay, this is my time to get up and
Let's
go.
get past this part. Yeah. I think it's the
And it's
perfect movie.
And
It's
because,
flawless.
as we talked about, it's the shark stuff that makes it exciting. It's the character work that makes it makes you really emotionally invested. So they all work together in concert. But I just want to end by saying, one of my favorite things is just people being passionate about things. And so if you are just overly excited in this, and it actually I had been years without watching Jaws, probably over a decade when I went a few years ago and saw it in the theater with you.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of how awesome Jaws was.
Yeah.
Maybe made me kind of like, oh yeah, Jaws is great. And talking with you about it got me excited about Jaws, and that excitement could be infectious. In fact, I brought this because after I went and saw it in theaters, I was like, I need to own it on Blu-ray. And I just bought it, Jaws on Blu-ray.
And that's the cover I was talking about when I was a kid.
Watched it again when I got on Blu-ray right after I'd watched it in theaters, and I was like, man, you're right. It doesn't seem to lose steam with rewatches.
No, I've rewatched. I mean, I don't remember if I said this at the top. I would say I've legitimately seen this movie at least 150 times. And I'm talking from start to finish. I've seen it. I think I tried to do the math. I think I've seen it 7 times in the theater.
Yeah.
Over the years, including once at the IMAX. So, and it's never lost any momentum to me. And I still think it's the perfect movie, and it's coming up on, in 2025, it'll be 50 years old.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, maybe the perfect way to end this podcast, say in 2 years, there'll be a 50th anniversary. I'm certain it will be put back in theaters for a big 50th anniversary push. And when our podcast has grown by then, and we
have our sponsors.
Maybe we'll get a theater and say, Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies is sponsoring a showing
of Jaws.
Or we'll get a whole community of people.
We'll just do a live podcast from the showing of Jaws.
Exactly. So that will conclude our conversation for today.
Thank you for indulging me and letting me talk about my favorite movie.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was.
I hope everybody else watching or listening enjoys it as much as we did.
And neither one of us made we're going to need a bigger podcast joke. So I'm really proud of us for not doing that.
You are so right.
Yeah, we really held off from the obvious joke.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yep. All right.
Alrighty, see you next week.
See you next week.